Well, hello everybody, and here we are for another episode of Soul Strings, and I am just absolutely thrilled to have with me today a legend in not only in the music industry here in Missouri, but all over the country. And I'm with Pat Liston today. Pat, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you much.
It is such a pleasure. I know you have a long, rich history of things that you've done, people that you've met, how it all started for you back when you were just a young boy and your mom and your family being in music. But let's talk a little bit, first of all, let's talk a little bit about some of the upcoming shows that you have here in St. Louis. And let's get to those. So what do you have coming up, and who are some of the people that are playing with you?
Well, this Saturday, I'll be out at the Blue House Theater in Warrenton doing a solo thing, but Abigail Stolschmidt will be
We know her very well.
Yeah, she'll be joining me on probably 8 of the songs, so we've worked together several times. She's great.
Is it just the two of you?
Yeah.
Oh, that'll be very...
I'll tell a lot of stories and stuff like that, so it'll be, pretty intimate style thing,
Anything else coming up besides that?
Well, I have a show coming up at Delmar Hall. Now, it was supposed to be May 2nd, but I think we're going to change it to July. But that'll be with the Pat Liston Band and guys that I've worked with before that are great. And Dan Lowry, who will be on the Irish pipes. Because some of my stuff on my first 2 CDs, I used an Irish piper, an Eland piper. And it's a real nice sound. And most people, just regular folks that come to see me, are not used to that. And it's really, the Irish pipes are really great. The bagpipes, they call them, are called Highland pipes. And in the movie, what was it, Braveheart, all the pipes in that were Irish pipes. They were not Highland pipes.
I didn't know there was a difference.
Oh yeah, no, the Highland pipes are the ones you see guys marching, and playing, that.
So what do the other ones look like?
They were designed just to scare people. I mean, they really were for battle, and that's what they used them for. But the uilleann pipes, you have to sit to play them. Uilleann is a Gaelic word for elbow, because you have this bellows under your arm, and you pump air into the bag, and then the chanter has to sit here on your leg. But all those mournful, what they call Irish airs, those things, like I said, in Braveheart, they wanted that sound. Well, you're not going to get those out of a Highland pipe. They're brash. I mean, they'll scare you, But the uilleann pipes are very melancholy, so, and most of my stuff is. So that's why I used uilleann pipes on several of my songs.
When I called you and you were telling me about the book, which I didn't know you had written, you sent it to me right away, and I had told Kelly, I said how captivated I was from the minute I opened the first page. It was like, I know you said you had to have someone kind of go back through it and check everything and make sure it sounded like you knew what you were talking about.
I had a good friend of mine do the editing, and just a different thing. I mean, it's amazing things you say that you don't realize are incorrect, and she would always get back to me and say, no, it's supposed to be like this, and so it was a lot of help. But my wife was real adamant that she not take my voice out, that it has to sound like me talking, so
it did. I felt like you were doing the storytelling as I was reading the book. I felt like it was you just talking to me like we're talking right now.
Absolutely. Well, I've been a bard longer than I've been a musician, because I told, even when I was a kid, I would make stories up. A friend of mine told me that, which I had forgotten all about. She said I used to sit everybody down when we were kids and just start telling them stories that I made up.
I love this poem in the very beginning of the book, and it says, on October 15th, 1948, a mother brought into the earth a baby, one destined to become a star. Not just any star, as there are many in the sky that shine brightly on a clear night, but a star that brings emotion, passion, thought, even tears to the world. Words given him in a song. The mother gave the child a guitar and said, sing loud, sing strong. And thus he screamed. The child grew to a youth, and then a man with dreams, hope, the love of music. His stardom may not have come to be what he dreamed, but in truth, his stardom touched so many lives in so many ways, including his own. From encounters with from future music greats to being a loving son, brother, and a friend, the young man, Pat Liston, not only became a star, he became a galaxy. Who wrote that?
That, I believe that was Bob Bell from Wildwood Springs Lodge. And it it's so complimentary that I've told my brother, I said, man, I almost feel weird putting this in my book. But it was Bob that wrote it, and it was the way he felt about it. So
Wow, what a testament.
yeah,
to you.
Bob does Wildwood Springs Lodge and brings in, I don't know if you're familiar with the place, but they bring in some wonderful artists. It's an old hunting lodge from the 20s. And that's where they have the concerts, right in the main lobby. And I mean, I've worked there with Three Dog Night. I mean, they have big names there, you know. And Bob, when he sends out
Where
his
is this again?
in Steelville,
Okay.
Missouri, and
And it's still there.
oh yeah. No, in fact, he called me when he was going to do it. Wanted to know if I'd come down and look at it and tell him what I thought. And I'm just that kind of guy. Yeah, go for it. This is a wonderful idea, you know. And he had a few rough years, you know, that he wondered whether it was a good idea. But he's had Marshall Tucker. He's had Michael Martin Murphy, Richie
wow.
Furay,
Yeah.
Christopher Cross. Like I said, Three Dog Night. Mama's Pride even played down there a couple of times. So it's a neat place.
Now tell me this is Pat's book, 13 Notes to Life. Now, when I saw the title, it was intriguing. I'm going to let you tell me what the title means and how it came about.
Well, a good friend of mine, Bill Waterhouse, owned a bar in Dogtown called the Waterhouse, and his dad's name was Marion, just like John Wayne, and he was an old electrician, and he used to come. He's a really good guy, but very pensive guy. You know, you'd think, he's just some old union electrician. The guy ran deep, you know, and he was sitting there one time at the bar, and I sat down and I said, Mr. Waterhouse, I was actually going to school across the street here at the time. So what's up? He said, I was just sitting here thinking, if you go octave to octave, because he played little keyboards, there's 13 notes in all, if you count both octaves. And from those 13 notes, every song in history has been written, from Bach to the Beatles. And it's all different. And how do people do that? I remember sitting there. First I got really emotional like I'm doing now. But then I thought, oh yeah, a little music boy going to music college, you know, or went to music college. Yeah, I was already out of music college. I'd never thought of that. How absolutely mind-boggling that is.
That's incredible. I didn't either till I saw it.
Just that stretch of notes, every song. And people are still writing them, you know. So I credited him with that in the book, because his Billy Waterhouse has passed away, and his wife one time got aggravated at me for using that. She said, nobody even know. I said, Marie, you have to read the whole book, you know. And when she read the book in the front, I do give Mr. Waterhouse credit for it, because he was a neat guy.
So she was okay with it after
Yes,
that.
she said, I'm sorry, I didn't see that part.
So you started playing at the age of 10, correct?
Yeah.
Pretty much playing guitar. Your first band was when you were 15. What kid at the age of 15 gets to play the Chase Park Plaza as their first gig?
Well, it was a different time back then. There was teen towns were wonderful because they really gave you a place to play, and every Catholic school had a teen town. So there was I mean, even Bob Cuban, that's how he kind of made his first living, you know, with all of it was playing teen towns. So you had that, and then the Chase Park Plaza, I forget, that was some kind of a party or something, but you know, you always got work from somewhere, you know. But that's how the bands got good, because you had these teen towns and stuff, so you played all the time. So, you know, if you were going to get tight, you got tight, you know.
I actually got to sing with Bob Cuban once when he was older at a real estate party he was playing.
Oh, no
I
kidding.
got to go on stage and sing one song with him. I think it was When a Man Loves a Woman by Percy Sledge.
Now, you want to know what? That was the first song I ever sang.
Was it really?
Yep. Then years later, I actually recorded in the studio that Percy Sledge did that song.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Wow. We share a couple of things, and nothing to your level for sure, but there's just a couple of things that we'll talk about. One thing that I really loved was your dad. Now, this song, your dad didn't write this song, did he? The Cisco Kid was a friend of mine.
I wrote that. I wrote that about him. But it was because of him I wrote it. It was a true story.
That is so cool.
My dad, when I was 5, You know, we'd play cowboys when we were kids. And I always wanted to be the Cisco Kid. Because I always liked different. He didn't have a cowboy hat. He had a sombrero. It was different. You know, his outfit was different.
Right. It wasn't like the Lone Ranger.
And the pinto horse and everything. I mean, I just thought he was cool, you know. And my dad one day came home and said, I'm going to introduce you to the Cisco Kid. And I was like, and I knew Dad, you know, he was Irish, you know, so you never know if you're getting a straight scoop or a wee bit of the Blarney, you know.
Oh, a little bit of a...
But about a week later, we went to the Fireman's Rodeo that used to be over by where the college is now, over there on Oakland. And which was also the Highlands, but right across was an open, well, it was the Missouri Stables where there were horses, and there was an open stadium. And that's where the firemen would have their rodeo every year. And he was featured one year that Cisco Kid was going to be there.
That is so cool.
And my dad worked at a really nice little bar right across the street. My guess is that Duncan Ronaldo probably came in the bar. My dad charmed scales off a snake, so he just probably got to know him then. Although we did have to sneak back there to get to him, which my dad went through a whole ordeal to do that. But once we got to him, you know, I mean, he and my dad talked like they knew each other. And I as a 5-year-old, I'm thinking, I'm looking at my dad going, who is this guy? He knows the Cisco Kid.
That's so great. You know what I really love when I read your book is the things that doesn't happen anymore. And it's like your family was really involved in music, but you guys would have outings at home with everybody who would just gather around and play.
Both sides of the family.
And everybody played.
They would sit in I had Uncle Jerry play guitar, and his daughter played guitar, and a couple of my aunts. My grandma played banjo. My grandpa, who had already passed away by that time, but did play the violin. And they could harmonize like a choir. And my first experience with harmony just blew me away. I knew they weren't singing the same note, but I didn't know what they were singing. But that's how I learned harmony.
I was going to say.
Was listening to the different
tones,
people, which is also how I developed my ear. Because when I went to the St. Louis Institute of Music over here, I was telling you about, my written theory classes were hard because I didn't know how to write music. But my oral theory classes, I was so good at it from figuring out chords off of it. You know, teacher would play a chord, and she didn't want to know if it was a C or an F. It was like, is this a major, a minor, an augmentative? And I could just snap it out like that, or intervals. It got to be where she would go, what's this, not you?
I was going to say, she's going to ask everybody else but you.
She told me at the class, just be quiet. She says, these kids could play rings around you on the pianos, but they do not have your ear. And this stuff is just like child's play to you. So just sit there, I'll give you an A, and just enjoy yourself, you know. So that was what I did in that class.
You know, it was kind of interesting as I read this book, just kind of follow your journey. I know 1961 was tough for you.
Yeah.
That's when you lost your dad. Your grandma left the house, and she moved.
She moved. She had family in Mississippi, and she would go back there periodically. But when Dad died, she couldn't deal with it, which was kind of a drag. Because I mean, my mom couldn't either, but she had to stay. And then my brother joined the Marines because I think for a lot of the same reason. You know, it was hard for him because he was older and had spent more years with my dad than we did. You know, so that was a tough time.
But one thing I really took from that is that's when you and your brother Danny got close.
Oh yeah.
And you guys were like the nucleus of what became Mama's Pride.
Yeah.
And I found that to be really interesting. Some of the other things that I found so interesting is like the Search 66. You almost got Michael McDonald in your band.
Yeah, I met him at a teen town. My mom had seen him. She was working for a catering company. And she had seen one of the places, events they catered. Mike's dad had a band and was playing there. And Michael was saying, Mike couldn't have been, he'd have had to have been like 16 or something at the time, very young. And at a teen town at St. James, which is where I grew up, my mom was chaperoning and came running. She said, that little boy's here. I said, what little boy? She said, the one I told you I heard at the thing that was so good, you know. So I listened. He was with Jerry J and the Sheridans, and I listened, and I went, wow, he is good. And I went up, offered him a job, and he knew who my band was, you know. But he said, well, they already bought me a coat, you know. So years later.
A coat to be in the band.
But then we also played for Search 66, which was a thing Capitol Records did that you were supposed to get a record deal. I think it was all just, you know, hype. But the week we played, there'd be 4 bands, and then the winner of the 4 weeks. On the 5th week, all the winners would play, and then it'd be well, the week we played, Jerry J and the Sheratons played, and Mike was with them, and we beat him, and I years later I saw Michael out in California, and he knew who we were, he knew who he was. We didn't hang, but I went there with Chuck to a rehearsal with Chucky Sabatino, and I baited Mike with, I said, remember Search 66? Well, I knew he'd remember. I don't care what he's done. This was from the beginning.
Yeah.
And you never forget that stuff. And he turned around, he goes, whoa, dude, where'd you pull that out? And I said, well, you and the Sheratons played. He goes, yes, we did. He said, man, I haven't thought about that in years. And I said, so did you guys win? No, we got beat out by this little St. Louis, South St. Louis band. And I went, he goes, you're kidding. That was you? I said, yep.
That is so
he got a big
cool.
laugh out of that.
I love some of these things I wrote down because it's like they were just pivotal moments in your life, and like Soul Illusions.
Oh, Soulful Illusions.
Yeah, Soulful Illusions. That's the first time that okay, because as musicians, there are things that we learn and we kind of go, wow, it's like that was the moment that I learned how to do this, and that was the moment that you learn how to feel the groove.
Yeah.
Feel the
Rudy
groove
Coleman
of
was the
music.
bass
It's so easy
player.
to play it. It's so easy to do it, and you can be just monotonous. Oh, I'm just playing this, but
Well, you
learn.
learn.
It's so different.
It's like Mustang Sally. The big joke about Mustang Sally, everybody hates it because that's because they play it like white boys. It's like Mustang Sally has a great groove. Go listen to a black band play Mustang Sally. It's a whole different song, And that's what I learned from the Soulful Illusions, and more specifically, Rudy Coleman, who was the bass player, was a great guy. But I remember we played at a bar, and it was like, he called me up, you need to come down to some bar down in Del Mar. So I did, and I'm playing, and I'm having a hard time following the band. I turned to Rudy, I said, does this drummer ever hit 2 and 4? And he laughed, he goes, no, man, you got to hear it in your head. And he goes, let me get you started. So he's doing 2 and 4. Now play. Now don't listen, drummer. Don't listen to me. Get that 2 and 4 in your head and just play. And I started playing, and it was like the sky opened up. I heard something that I didn't know was there. Blew me completely away.
How important do you think that was to the rest of your career?
Oh, it was definitely pivotal because I looked at music different. Like, oh, it's not just about, like Rudy said, it ain't just the chords.
A lot of people can play, but a lot of people can't feel.
Right.
That is so true. This really took me back. When you were with Bobby and the Innkeepers, you played the wah-wah tube.
Yeah.
And
I played that long before
And that was
Frampton.
before Peter Frampton.
Oh, long before him. I was in Anchorage, Alaska, and I saw a guy using that thing, and I'm like, what is it? And he was selling them for, I don't know, like $100, which a lot of money back then.
Right.
We're talking 1970, And I remember when the band left, with a long story, I had to stay afterwards for a thing, but he and I went out one night and got about half cooted, and he said, I'll show you how to make one, but you got to promise me you won't sell them. I don't want to sell them. I'm busy doing other stuff. So he explained it to me, and it really wasn't that hard, So I made one, and Bobby and the Innkeepers, and with well, that's where I got it from, and then also when I was
Chuck
in
Freeman?
Well, Chuck, yeah, that was Friends and Brothers was the band I played with after Bobby and the Innkeepers, but I actually knew those guys from Chuck Freeman and the Drivers,
Okay.
And that was the place when I first went to California. I used to go out to the valley, to this oh God, I'm amazed I can't remember the name of it. It was
I know, because you remember everything.
yeah, it was like the Playgirl, but that's not what it was. But it had a name like that. But they played out there, and on Thursdays I would go out to see them. And Chuck was a big guy. He was Irish, and he was a good singer, great entertainer, And we got to be friends. And he said, "So you're a musician?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Do you sing?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Would you like sing a song?" And get up, sing with the band, sing a song. I said, "Okay." So I got up, and I asked the guys if they knew "Try a Little Tenderness" by Otis Redding. Well, they were like, yeah, So they started playing that classic horn intro, that da 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 da. Chuck's at the bar, and I see him laughing. And I'm thinking, why would he laugh at this? This is a great song. Well, then I start singing it. I'm getting to the grunt part at the end, the got that thing, and he's laughing hysterically. And the more he laughed, the harder I dug in because it was making me mad, And I got off the
I love this
stage
story.
and I walked over and I said, man, what was so funny? Why do you think I sing funnier? And he's still laughing. He's no, because he was a big guy. He said, no, little brother. He goes, I'm just not used to hearing Otis Redding's voice come out of Donny Osmond's face. Because I looked like I was 14,
Oh my gosh, that's funny. Now, you know what? Life gives us ups and downs. Life gives us turns, left, right, fork in the road. And you went through so much stuff, but you dodged the draft twice.
Yes.
Not intentionally.
And yeah.
Not intentionally.
Well,
but
there was some intent behind it, but it was not like, I went to Canada or something. And when I finally did get out of the draft, it was not something I did, per se. I was in an automobile accident going to be drafted. And my brother was with me. I got broadsided. I went like this. My elbow hit him in the head. It chipped my elbow in 3 spots, which ultimately got me out of the draft.
And could have ended your career in a way, too.
Oh, yeah, because my arm was stiff. Doctor said, you may not play or, it could be years. And so I went home, and within 2 weeks, I was with a band already. So, it's like, no, we're not doing this.
Tell me the story about being on the plane and somebody coming back to you and say, hey, you want to come up front and hang out? They say,
and, to this day, I still don't get it. Why? But I was obviously in coach. And I had on like an Arlo Guthrie style hat. I had long hair. And at this point, we're talking 1971 or 2, somewhere in there. And this tall black man, really nice suit, walks up to me and says, are you a musician? And I said, yeah. He goes, well, the boys want to know if you'd like to come up first class and sit with them. I'm like, which boys? He goes, the Jackson 5. I said, let me get my stuff. And I just started grabbing things. And I went up there, and for whatever reason, I guess they found me interesting looking or something, or they knew. To this day, I can't imagine they had met everybody in the world, and I was nobody at this time, But they were all really nice. Michael was painfully shy. I mean, he was sitting with his dad, and I'm talking to the other guys, and Michael, like, when they introduced, he put his head down, put his hand up like that, I thought, wow, that's not the way he is on stage,
Right.
But I know when I got off the plane, I was going to join Friends and Brothers, and Roy, the sax player, was there to pick me up. I kind of knew him, but not real well, because they were with Chuck Freeman, And so as he and I are walking away, the Jackson 5 are down about 60 feet away there with their people, because they lived in California. And one of them, I think it was Tito, yelled, Pat. And I turned around. He said, good luck with the new band. I said, thanks. Enjoy your time at home. And so we started walking, and it had to be like 5 or 6 minutes went by. And Roy keeps looking back. He goes, who was that? I said, Jackson 5. You know the Jackson 5? I said, oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it was probably a
friends.
year later. We were in Hawaii one night after a gig, and we'd had a few drinks, and we were rooming together in this one motel. And he said something about the Jackson 5, and I bust out laughing. I said, well, I don't know the Jackson 5. He goes, they talked to you. I said, I met him on the airplane. He goes, I've been telling people that story forever, and you tell me. I said, keep telling the story. There ain't nothing wrong with that,
Oh, my gosh. Let's talk a little bit about some of the bands. People know you from being in Mama's Pride, but tell me a little bit about all of the bands that you backed.
Well, back when I was in California with Friends and Brothers, we would back, the oldies shows started getting big. This would have been 71 maybe. And these were not tributes. These were the people.
Right, yeah.
And but we backed the Shirelles, the Drifters, and the Coasters, and the Penguins, and Bobby Day, and I mean just so many of these oldie acts. And your rehearsal was in the dressing room. What key do you do this in? Because if you didn't already know the song, you had no business being there anyway. So that was the only thing. Maybe some of them changed the original key lower. Maybe they can't hit the notes anymore. So we had to know that ahead of time. But that was rehearsal. We just got up and started playing.
And it helped too, because throughout your life, you've been playing some of these songs.
Yeah.
Throughout
Oh,
your life.
Lord,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
I probably played every one of them, as did Friends and Brothers,
Right.
same thing. And we worked, one time we started working with a guy that, he wasn't an oldie. He had a song called The Snake, which was a lot newer, and Al Wilson.
I love this story.
And so we backed him on several shows, And then Danny came out, was visiting with me, and Al got a record deal with whoever, I don't know if it was ABC Downhill, somebody, and invited Danny and I to the record release party. It was at CBS. It was this big, huge thing, And so they're playing the music while everybody's there, drinking and partying and everything. And the song Ghetto Woman comes on. And Al really liked my brother. Danny had an afro out here, and he just thought that was funny.
That's huge.
And he said, oh, this is a hit single. Danny's listening to it, and it was a good song. Danny says, yeah, I like it. And I told Al, I said, he can spot a hit. I'm telling you, Al, I said, the kid could be an A&R guy, And he laughed, and put his arm around Dan, Well, then a couple minutes later, Show and Tell came on. And Al was saying something to him. He said, wait a minute. And he's listening. He goes, no. This is your hit. This is it right here. And Al said, this one? He goes, I'm telling you, Al, that's the hit. Ghetto Woman's a good song. This is a great song.
And he was right.
And I said, Al, he's never wrong. And he brought Snuff Garrett over, who was the producer. And Snuff just kind of went, oh, that's cool, walked away, yeah, it was this little kid. But then we were in Hawaii 6 months later. I guess we probably did have Mama's Pride together at that time. And on our off night, because you work 6 nights a week at these places, on our off night, we were in a taxi cab. And this DJ says, and now Al Wilson with his new hit, Show and Tell. We started yelling and hooting and hollering and everything. He took Danny's advice.
Now, when you were with Oak Records, Ray Ruff, and then Gold Star Studios, I love the story about the female bass player. Tell me a little bit about
Yeah, well, when I got with Oak Records because I worked with a guy named Donnie Brooks, who had a song called Mission Bell in the 60s. Mm-hmm. So kind of, and Donnie turned that into, Donnie had all kinds of money off the one dumb song, and he would be the first to tell you it was a dumb song. It was. But he was a good businessman, and he liked my voice. So he brought Ray Ruff into Friends and Brothers. They were doing an album called The Truth of Truths, which was a rock opera of the Old and New Testament. This was before Jesus Christ Superstar was out. And which they almost closed production on it when that came out, because it was like, they're going to think we're copying these guys. But we did it at Gold Star, and at Gold Star, it was all the Wrecking Crew. That was their home, mostly. And Joe Osborne was the bass player on Truth of Truths. Well, then they were going to do an album on me, So when I went in, I'm in the booth with Stan Ross, the engineer, who also was like huge in those days. And I'm looking around for Joe Osborne, and I'm not seeing, and I see a bass, sitting on a stand, And this woman picks the bass up and starts playing it. And I turned to Ray, I said, where's Osborne? He goes, oh, he's not on this session. I said, well, who's the chick? He turned to me, he goes, and I could see Ross kind of went like this, He said, do you say everything that comes into your head? I said, what? I'm just asking. He goes, Pat, that's Carol Kay. Well, even I knew who Carol Kay was. I didn't think she looked like that. She looked like, the Donna Reed show with pearls and a dress, she didn't always dress like that, but she did this day, But years later, when she first got it, because I think she just turned 90. But wow. Years later, when she got on Facebook, I messaged her and told her the story. Well, of course, she didn't remember it, Carol's played on everything,
Yeah.
But she thought it was a funny story. She said, yeah, I used to get a lot of flack by being a female bass player. She says, until I played. I said, oh, yeah. And she liked Young and Free, which was going to be on this album. It was never released. But she liked the groove of it, And I always just thought that was so cool that Carol Kay liked the groove of one of my songs. you
Yeah,
know?
I love the fact that you're like going, "Who's this chick?" And
Yeah.
it's like she's just one of the greatest bass players to
Oh,
play with
and
just
there
about
was
everybody.
there was her. There was well, Hal Blaine played drums. I remember there was a story one time that that the drummer for Springsteen, they were playing someplace, and backstage in a dressing room was a rubber stamp on the wall that said Hal Blaine strikes again. Well, that's what he used to do because he did like 5 sessions a day. Had 5 sets of drums, a huge road crew, and they would just set him up in different studios. He'd go in, do all the sessions, stamp all his sheet music, and leave. And
Kind of like the Saturday Night Live skit of Michael McDonald going
yes,
from one
yeah,
place.
very similar. And I remember this guy saying to he brought Bruce Springsteen in. He said, "Look at this, Hal Blaine. That's his stamp." And he was all thrilled about that. And I just laughed when I read that story, because I had a piece of sheet music that was my song, stamped Hal Blaine Strikes Again.
That's awesome. You know what I love that you did, and you did this probably, maybe it was last year, or maybe it was during when everybody was not allowed to go anywhere.
Right.
But you started posting on Facebook the meanings and the stories behind
Oh.
all your songs.
And I knew people were going to like that. They liked it even more than I thought. But people like stories.
Oh, yeah.
They love stories, And I started explaining some of the songs maybe on my new CD or something. And it just went from there, where I ended up explaining every song on all my CDs, all the Mama's Pride albums that I wrote. Well, excuse me. Then at one time I had written a whole thing of famous people I'd met. And so then I started going through that and telling stories about these different people that I met, And somebody said, "You ought to make another book, just a small book of just that stuff. That right there
Yeah.
would be fun,
That would be cool.
So
That would be
I
awesome.
did go through Facebook, because you never know, Facebook could be gone tomorrow. And I did cut and paste all those stories onto Word
great idea.
files, so in case later I don't have to come up and think about it again.
Think about it, to write and rewrite it all.
Right.
So Mama's Pride, I'm sure I know, not everybody knows, but you can get a pretty good idea because Mom was a very influential person in your life. So
Yes.
is that how the name of the band came to
Yeah,
be?
Mom taught me to play guitar. Mom was on KMOX radio in the 30s.
Mm-hmm.
She and another lady, Hazel Haley Campbell was her maiden name, and they were the Texas Bluebonnets. And the Pappy Cheshire was the something hillbilly show or something, and Skeets Yaney was on. I mean, these were big names at that time in that genre, And she was with them for quite a while, and then when she got married, she walked away from it and raised a family,
Right.
And she was my greatest cheerleader, far and away, because you'd get these guys with one musician that I worked with, his dad was always like,
Get a real job.
get a real job kind of thing. And he'd always I said, there's nothing wrong with your dad, buddy. I said, most dads are saying that, focus on something. Mom thought there was no greater job. There was nothing you could aspire to that had more clout to her than being a musician, So I had that kind of support,
Yeah, that's so amazing.
and that meant a lot.
And that's how the name.
And right, when we started playing, me and Max and Danny, I came back, and Danny was in a band with Max. Well, the three of us came back to the house, sat around and harmonized. I hated the fact that all three of us played guitar, because at the time, if there was a Skinner, but nobody knew who they were, And I thought, who has 3 guitars? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of, But our harmonies were so tight because Max had that same understanding of harmonies. And we sang everything from the Temptations to the Beatles. I mean, we were down there for hours. And that's why I said, we have to do this. We have to put this band together, And so I came back. We got in the truck and we drove to California. We had no name for the band, And everybody would write names. There was 3 cars, 2, 2, and 1, because it's a 5-piece band. And when we went to get gas, everybody would compare names. One of the names, because my brother's Afro, we were going to call it, one guy said, why don't we call it Tumbleweeds, And Danny was like, no, So, but me and Max actually said, what about Mother's Pride? Because he loved my mom. He loved the fact that she was so supportive, And his mom probably wasn't, but she was nothing against Mary. She was like every other person's parent, you know. And so he said, call it Mother's Pride. I said, that's good. I said, but that sounds too rigid. I said, how about Mama's Pride? That sounds a little, he goes, oh, no, that's better. And when we stopped at the filling station, they all got, I said, all right, before you give me names, me and Max got one, Mama's Pride. And they all looked at each other, tore up their stuff, threw it in the trash, said,
That's it.
That's us.
So you get the Atlantic record deal. You've got all kinds of cool stuff going on. You're recording at, where were you recording? What house?
Criteria Studios was,
Yeah.
and we were staying at 461 Ocean Boulevard, which was Clapton's. Everybody thought that's where he lived. I'm like, dude, you really think he put his home address on the front of an album? You know, but it was a band house, an extremely expensive one. But that's where he stayed, and just thought he'd call the album 461 Ocean Boulevard, you know.
And he actually showed up one time, right?
He showed up at the studio.
Studio. Okay.
Yeah. And actually, he had, what's her name?
Patty?
Patty Boyd was with him.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I think I was more thrilled to meet her. I mean, she's so iconic, you know,
Yeah.
I mean. And plus, that was back in his drinking days, so he was fairly quiet. You know, he didn't have a lot of personality back in his drinking days, you know. And, but, when we were at Criteria, there were so many that came in. The Bee Gees came in because Arif Mardin was our producer. And they came in to see him because he produced that first, when they changed, when the Bee Gees went, there was no such thing as disco at the time. There was no name for it. But when we thought it was funk. That was the one that had Jive talking on it.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of the album. But we heard the album. We thought it was great. And we went to their record release party up this penthouse at this beautiful hotel. I mean, they pulled out all the stops. And about the only ones there was record people, the Bee Gees, and us. I mean, nobody liked
disco at the time.
the new thing.
Right.
This isn't the Bee Gees. It doesn't sound
Kinda
like the Bee
that
Gees.
throughout music history. It's like,
And
what is this new stuff?
Barry,
Where's grunge?
Barry and I sat at a table getting drunk, and he says, we screwed up. We screwed up. I said, I don't think so, man. Well, they say it's not us. It doesn't. I said, yes, it does sound like you. It sounds like you doing what you're doing, you know, just different style, but it's absolutely Bee Gees, you know. He said, well, I don't know, you know. And then that album went like quadruple platinum, you know. I mean,
know.
It was huge.
And then the movie helped to consider.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Then their career just catapulted into the stratosphere.
So many times moving back and forth from LA to St. Louis and back and forth to LA, and then 1978 happens and you have your first child.
Yes.
And
Alicia. Yeah.
that was a turning point in your life.
Oh, yeah.
As well.
Oh, yeah. Because, I mean, I've told all my kids, you know, no matter what you do in life, that's the greatest thing you'll ever do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Is have a child. You played stages on Wednesday nights with Bill Benjamin being the owner.
Forever.
And I have a dear story about Bill Benjamin as well, because I played in a band called Nichols back in the 80s.
Oh, you were in Nichols?
Yeah. Well,
I did not know that.
I did not look like this.
Well,
I had hair like Kelly's.
none of us did, you know.
I'll show you a picture later. But I have a great story because Bill, and then Nichols started playing Wednesdays after you guys weren't doing it anymore.
Nickel beer.
Nickel beer night.
Yeah.
And you could go in there for $1.50 and have a good buzz.
Oh, man, I'm telling you, yeah. I remember when they said that Nichols playing nickel beer, and I'm thinking, oh, man, what a deal, you know.
So when I was in Nichols, I got out of Nichols and started to form my own band. And Bill took a liking to me. And this is just the kind of guy he was. He said,
Bill's a great guy.
He said, Gordon, he goes, do you need a place to rehearse? And I said, yeah. He goes, so the back room behind that back bar with the tires on it, remember?
Right, yep, sure.
He goes, here's the key. Use it whenever you need it.
That's so
And
Benjamin,
yeah. Yeah. So I had a place to rehearse, and I rehearsed my new band Jaguar, and that's where I formed Jaguar.
Oh, I remember Jaguar, too.
Yeah, I had Jeff Burdett, a lot of Webster grad musos there that
Right.
was in my band. Jimmy Griffin and George Potzos, you know those two.
Wow, yeah, sure, no both.
They were like 16. It's
Yeah,
funny how
I was going to say they had to be pretty
They
young.
were like 16 years old. They came in and they go, man, we want to try out for your band, Gordon. We want to be in your band. And I said, you know what? I said, all right. So I let them rehearse, and then I wanted to make sure that I had great musicians. That I
Right.
came out hit it running. I didn't want any snags.
I always joined bands that had better musicians than I was, because how am I going to grow
Right.
if I'm the top guy, you know.
And I was thinking, man, these kids are a little too green for me. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so I didn't take them. So to this day, I say, the best thing I ever did for you is not take you in my band, because you would have never been in Broken Toys,
Right.
which led to King of the
Right.
Hell, which led to...
Right.
So I'm always telling that story. 1982 happens, and you're at 4th and Pine, and it is the end of Mama's Pride as you know it. So
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about that gig at 4th and Pine.
There was there was actually 2 end dates. One was in St. Louis, one was in Illinois. But this one was more, the actual last date was at Fat Cats in Edwardsville, and there's a whole story with that. But the one in St. Louis was different because I wrote a song for the occasion and didn't tell anybody in the band. And so we do it, and it was pretty emotional. We'd been together for
I'm
quite
sure.
some time, and
Absolutely.
you know, had gone through
Life.
hell and back, yeah.
Life together.
And I'm trying to think of what the heck the name of the song was, the farewell song. And so we get off the stage, and everybody's, you know, they got banners and screaming, and people are, even the crowd is emotional, you know. And I go back up on stage. Danny says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm doing a song." Danny goes, "Oh." He says, "Don't do this to me. You're going to kill me." So I got up and did the farewell song. Oh, these guys they're all off to the side just sobbing, you know, because that's what I do, you know. I write songs that'll rip your heart out, you know. And, but it was a very heartfelt song, you know, and it meant a lot to them. And, but I think that technically Fat Cats over in Edwardsville was the actual last
The
date.
Fat Cats. I used to love to sing that.
And that happened in the January of '82 when the big snow hit.
I remember that.
We were expecting 6 inches. Edwardsville got 22 inches. Lou had rented limos for us, and nobody could leave. I mean, the limo stayed, and we ended up staying the night at Fat Cats. And I know Lou had taken us to Charlie's, which is a real fancy restaurant. He got all the appetizers, there's escargot and all this stuff, and you know, oysters Rockefeller, and he brought some of it back when we went to play that night. And he sent a bag of White Castles up as a joke when we were playing, you know. And I know when we were there, all of a sudden everybody, "Where's that bag of Castles at?" Because we knew and I fell asleep on the stage, and I remember waking up, and there was a Castle box right next to a shell from an oyster Rockefeller. And I said, "Man, if that ain't my career, I don't know what is." You know, one day oyster Rockefeller, the next day White Castle. You know,
Sums up kind of the music.
it did.
that's going
Oh yes,
on.
it was definitely a metaphor.
You know, and so let's talk a little bit about faith. In 1977, you say that's when you were saved,
Yeah,
and life started taking on a new meaning for you. And I really love the story about Catherine Marshall and the book that you found.
right.
Tell me a little bit about that.
We had a motorhome, and in the back there was this thing that we used for a library. We get paperbacks. My cousin Art loved reading, you know, and some of the other guys did too, you know. So I would try to buy books that, you know, I thought maybe they'd like. And I was in a bookstore one day in St. Louis, and I saw this book that had a really cool cover. This woman, the wind was blowing on her. They've since changed the cover. This idiot. It was a great cover, but it was Adventures in Prayer by Catherine Marshall. And the title just kind of went by me. I just thought, this is so cool. I mean, I remember years later thinking that had to be God, because there's no way I'm buying a book called Adventures in Prayer, you know. And I mean, I was raised Catholic. I mean, my mom was very spiritual. I mean, it's not like it was something alien to me.
New to you, yeah.
But it sat on the bookshelf for a while. I remember my cousin one time picking it up and going, "What's this?" So what do you mean? It's a book. Adventures in Prayer, really? You know? I said, "It's a cool cover." He looked at it, he said, "Well, yeah, I'll give you that." And he put it back. He didn't read it. And even I didn't for a while. And at one time we were, it was in between, because when we did concerts, sometimes we'd have 3 or 4 days in between that it wasn't worth driving all the way back to St. Louis. So we would just use whatever money we had to get 1 or 2 motel rooms for all of us, you know. And one night I was out in the motorhome and picked it up and started reading it. And it was truly a book about prayer. That's all. I mean, it wasn't, she didn't go into the gospel or any of those kinds of things. But it was so fascinating, her whole concept and things she would say about prayer. I mean, certain things she said about Christianity that I'd never heard, just the approach. And she talked about some of her other books. Her husband's name was Peter Marshall. I think at one time he was like the chaplain at the White House. And
You said Peter Marshall, I could think of was Hollywood Squares because that was his name.
yes, that was his name too, right? Same name. I actually thought when I read the book at first, I thought she was married to him, you know. But I bought that book. She had a book called A Man Called Peter. Well, then Man Called Peter got more specific as far as the gospel, as far as accepting Christ and all this stuff. And I was just like really confused by that, because most religions, you know, I mean, you had to be good, you know.
Couldn't mess up.
Yeah, that's right. You
dare
had to be good to get to
Make
heaven.
one mistake.
And, you know, she brought verses like Ephesians 2:8 and 9, you know, that, no, it's saying just the opposite. You can't be good enough.
Right.
It's by grace. Grace is unmerited favor. You didn't even deserve the grace. That was given to you, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
And that whole concept just completely blew my doors off. It's like, no. Then I bought a book called Christian Secret to a Happy Life by Hannah Whitall Smith, who she referenced. Well, Hannah lived in the 1800s. And me, I'm such an idiot. I'm thinking, they believed that even then? And it's like all of a sudden then I went, I think Jesus goes back a little further than 1800s,
Yes, he
Pat,
does.
you know.
And he believed that.
And he kind of believed that,
People
yeah.
forget what Jesus taught, you know.
Yes. Well, then I bought a Bible. I remember I went to we were down in,
This is so cool to me.
I think Tampa. And I thought, well, I really like these books. I like what they're saying, but I wanted to get a Bible because I wanted to read it for myself. You know, I didn't want somebody spoon feeding me something that maybe they just pick things
Decide
out,
what
you know.
traditions decide.
And she said, well, you know, she said the New International is the newest version. She said, we only have the New Testament.
This blew my mind.
She said, we don't have the Old Testament
Yeah.
yet, you know, as one. And I said, so she showed it to me. It was leather bound. I had the little case snapped, you know. And I said, maybe the New Testament's all I can handle right now, you know. And she said, would you like your name on it? I said, what do you mean? She says, well, we have this thing, the gold leaf thing that'll put your name in gold. And I'm like, yeah, you know, I want that. And I still have that Bible. Just fax it out in the car. And so I brought it back to the motel. I mean, you know, and I kind of looked at it a little, and I thought, this is cool. So I walked into the motel room. I said, look what I got. And they go, what's that? It's the Bible. And the room got deathly quiet. I mean, and I understand. They're thinking, I'm the leader of the band. I'm the guiding light. And now I'm reading the Bible. And they're just going,
Still the guiding light.
oh my
They
God.
just don't know it yet.
Exactly. I remember one time we were trying to work out a song that I'd written. It was really hard, and it was like a Christian song, Christian themed song. And I said something like, well, maybe this just isn't quite right for the band as far as the style, you know. And they were like, yeah, let's try something else. What else you got? I said, well, I got this other one called Let's All Go to Heaven Together. You can hear them all go. But we actually did do that one because it was kind of gospel-y, like almost black gospel. And they actually really did like that. In fact, when I do this show at Del Mar Hall, I'm going to do that song. We haven't done it probably in 25 years.
Oh, that's
you know?
awesome.
So, yeah, it should be cool.
I love what you said, that sometimes, going back to what, with your time with finding those books, that some people use faith more like a weapon than an olive branch.
Yeah.
And it's so true.
Yeah.
You know?
And often, I don't think they mean to. There was somebody on Facebook one time that was saying, I don't know, something really derogatory about something, and you know, and we got into some, and I was trying to nicely, and they were Christian, you know, and they very well may have been, but I said, you know, well, we need to say something. I said, well, about their sin? He goes, yeah. I said, now you're talking about non-Christians, right? He goes, yeah. I go, are you a Christian? He goes, yes. I said, then I need a chapter and verse here because I'm not following you.
Let him who was
Well,
without sin cast the first
he says
stone.
God wants us to convict them of sin because their sin's so bad or something. And I said, well, do you think that sin would be worse than blasphemy? Well, no, but who's doing blasphemy? I said, you are. I said, you have just given that job to you. And according to Scripture, that's the Holy Spirit's job, is to convict people of sin, to make them aware, whatever, not to beat them over the head with a hammer, but to make them aware.
I don't come here to judge the world, but to save the world.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And if he's not doing it, I'm pretty sure you probably shouldn't either.
Yeah, you know what was really cool about this time when you were getting close to God and you were really seeing, and your relationship with God was getting stronger, so was your mom's, and you guys were kind of sharing that.
That was another really wild thing when I came back off the road, because this whole thing happened while I was on the road. And I came back off the road, and so because Mom and I always shared this kind of, Mom was my best friend, and I mean, we shared a lot of that kind of stuff. And I was telling her, I said, Mom, we've been believing wrong. She goes, we sure have. And I went, what? Do what? She goes, I've been watching the 700 Club. And I mean, you can say what you want about Pat, but he did give the gospel. He was, he was a godly man, And she said, he says, and she starts telling me exactly what I just learned. And I'm thinking, I said, Mom, I just started reading the Bible and this book and all this stuff. And she flipped out. I mean, she was like, so we both have been doing the same thing at the same time, but separately? I said, seems so.
That is so awesome.
So it was very awesome because Mom, again, was my best friend. I mean, she was...
What greater thing to share faith with your mom?
Yeah.
Because I'm
and
like,
the way it
that's
happened,
me and my mom. That's
and
amazing.
I had a bad marriage. It was very short. It was also very dumb to even do because we were not compatible at all. And so she had left me. We got a divorce, and I was in the worst place I could be in. But then this happened. I'm trying to think which happened first. It was like I went to this thing with my mom. It was a Catholic thing, but it kind of started me on that cycle. Mm-hmm. And that's when I think that's when I read the book. I had already bought the book, but that's when I read the book because I was devastated from this, not so much because of her, but I wanted to be a married guy. I wanted to have a family at some point, Right. And this gal she was not cut out for that at all, but she was the only girl I knew that well. So I thought, well, maybe I'll marry her, But because of that, it brought me to such a low point. This is the story of a lot of people's story. Sometimes everything else has to be exhausted before you finally look at what's real, And that's what happened to me. And then, like I said, that happened. Then I went on the road, and then all this other stuff we've talked about, that all happened. Yeah. So it was, there's a reason for everything. There's a phrase my son-in-law used, he said oh gosh, what is it? It's a great working thing, whereas there's no mistakes, there's just lessons.
Wow, I like that.
And it's the truth. Yeah. It's all attitude. I mean, you have to look at things
either win or you learn.
You can be a victim or you can learn something, And it's like the old adage that everything happens for a reason. I really do think it is. And there's a lot of things in life that seem really cruel. My dad died when I was 12, but even in the Bible, it says, now we know in part, then we'll know fully. In other words, we'll have God's head and, oh, okay. I remember an atheist friend of mine one time, we went to see, actually, he said he was agnostic, but Woody Allen says an agnostic is just an atheist that's afraid of commitment. And we went to see Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Well, he walked out of the theater like Moses coming down off Zion. I mean, he was like, oh, would that be cool? Here they come in this ship and they know everything. And I said, well, what would you tell them? I was setting him up. He goes, I couldn't tell them anything. Their intelligence would be so high, I wouldn't even be able to think of a question smart enough to ask. I said, oh my God, dude. Why couldn't that be God? Oh, don't ruin this for me. I said, no, I'm not trying to ruin it. You just described God, dude. I said, will you stop looking at TV evangelists and afraid? Because I think he was afraid he'd look like one of them, you know. And I said, no, I'm not telling you to believe in a TV evangelist, you know. But what you just explained was a perfect explanation of what God is. And that's what I think that verse means, that we know in part and then we'll know fully, because we can't, because you'll get, you know, the big, if there's a God, why is there so much misery, or why was there a Holocaust? And my answer is, I have no idea.
Right.
Because this is way beyond my faith scale. You know,
yeah. Our thoughts are not his thoughts.
No,
his
no.
thoughts. Yeah.
And my buddy really explained, I said, if that was a beautiful way of explaining it, dude, I could have done better myself. You couldn't even ask a question smart enough to ask, you know. And Jesus used to say that to the apostles a lot, you know.
Yeah.
Are you still so dull or something, you know? Because they were just knuckleheads. These were not Pharisees. These guys are fishermen and stuff, which now would be like, you know, just guys that do carpentry work. It doesn't mean you're, you know, stupid or anything by any means, but you're not in the upper levels, you know, of the intelligentsia, you know. But that's who he chose.
On almost everybody in the Bible, that's
well, it's like the book, The Shack, and a lot of Christians go freak out. You know, it's not scriptural. Well, I don't think the guy meant it to be scripture, you know. But in the movie, when the character that was supposed to be God the Father was a woman, a black woman, and there was a reason why, you know, they get into the explanation of it. But at one point in that movie, because I'm watching it just being open-minded and thinking, it would be interesting to think God's friendly, or that God laughs. Well, why wouldn't he?
You know he has a sense of humor.
And she said something in the movie. She said to the guy, she says, you like Neil Young? And he goes, yeah, I guess, you know. She goes, I like Neil Young. I almost lost it because it suddenly hit me. Does God say that about me? Or does God say that, you know, about Ringo or something? I mean, and it's like, yeah, if that's supposed to be a father, do you think I'm not proud of my son?
Yeah.
When I see my son playing music and stuff, I mean, do I get choked up? Yeah.
What does God want us to do with our God-given talents? Use them.
He says, you're made in my image. His greatest part of his image is he's a creator. Well, you know, and I always tell people, don't get hung up on the fact that I do music, so that's somehow special. There is a speciality to music, but creation is creation. If you do carpentry or whatever, you're creating something that's needed, and there's a talent there, you know. So never write off what you do as, well, I only do this. Because if you truly look at what you do as only, then you need to do something else. Do something may not pay as much, but that makes you feel like you matter. Because I think God wants you to feel like you matter, you know.
And you know what? It was there was a verse that I love that you put in your book when all of this was everything was transforming for you, and then you were ending your career with Mama's Pride, and you're thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do now? I think you even said that to your wife. What am I going to do now?
Right.
It's like, who am I? You know, kind of like, and then you said, you just grab the Bible, open it up, God show me something, and Isaiah 43:18 and 19 opened up. Forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing, now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I'm making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. And it was like, oh, okay.
See, and I was always told by pastors, don't just do that. Just open up the Bible. He kind of wants you to read the whole thing, you know, because it does make sense. But I think God knew that I needed something. I had just walked away from something that was my whole life.
Right.
Everything I'd ever wanted, you know. And that verse just blew me completely away. I mean, it was like, and of course, being human, I'm thinking it's going to happen next week. You know, this new thing's going to be right away. The new thing was just a slow process, you know. And I like my life, you know. And there were things, you know, quote, disappointments in music that happened. People say, well, do you ever get bitter or regret that this didn't happen? I said, no, because then I wouldn't be right here where I am now. And right here where I am now is something I really love. I love my wife. I love my kids. I might not have any of that if this thing had happened. I said, if God came down and said, I'll give you anything you want, I'd say, I want a what if machine. I want a monitor that'll show me what if this happens? Because I will guarantee you, if I say, yeah, but what if, this, and this had, that it would not be as good as what I have right now. Because some of the most miserable people I've ever met were rich people. Not just rich people, but celebrity people. In other words, people that got that fortune pretty quick, because it's not about money. It really isn't, and I've seen enough of it to know that. I mean, I got nothing against money, I mean, God wants to give me all kinds of money. I'm good with that, but it's not the core. It's really not the core of things. And as far as the things on earth, family, kids, I mean, that's really good friends.
Oh.
I mean, I wrote a song that I've never recorded called Hello, Goodbye, not the Beatles song. But it was a song I wrote about, I had met a guy and his wife, John Gagliardo, and his wife, Rhonda, and they, John had talked about, he was a Mama's Pride fan, and he said, I used to talk to Max and Danny all the time. He said, you not so much. And I said, well, was I a jerk? Because this was after I started playing solo, and John would come in. John, actually, my wife now, John introduced me to. And he said, no, you were just always looking past everything. He said, you were on a mission. He said, and we knew that. So we just didn't talk to you much. So I wrote this song, Hello, Goodbye, and it was about that what all I was missing, I'd say hello and goodbye. But what I was missing was life, real life, And in fact, I think I'm going to do that out at the show coming up out in Warrenton at the Blue House Theater. Because I've only done it a couple of times live, but it's got a great story with it, and I want to do a lot of story type things, But yeah, my career and everything was important, and all of that, everything I've done, I love it, I love the fact Henry Paul from the Outlaws calls me. We're still good friends. And one time he called and he said, man, he was probably getting pensive himself. You ever thought how lucky we are, man, to do everything we've done? I said, yeah. I said, of course I do, Henry, And I said, I've done things other people only dream about.
Absolutely.
And
I can tell you that.
And people just, I had a guy one time say, you're lucky. And one time somebody, when they met my wife, she's attractive, and they said, you're lucky. And it just, I just turned to him, I said, I may be lucky sitting here, but I ain't sitting here because I'm lucky. And I went, oh, man, the guy was really drunk. I went, I just wasted that great line on a drunk. I got to write that down, use it in a song, But that, that is the truth. It's hard work. I mean, I went to California in '69 by myself. I didn't know anybody, in a city of 9 million people. And the square mile is the biggest city in the world, square miles wise. And without a moment's thought. And it wasn't easy, Right. There were times you got so lonely, you were just depressed. I realized years later, I was depressed. I didn't know what depressed was. But when I thought back on it, I was like, oh, God, that was depression, Because you'd have those moments where you were lonely, you missed everybody back home, but there was this pull to go this direction. And I knew that if I went back there, I'd have to go back as a failure. And it's like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that.
What a wonderful story. What a wonderful life you've had. And
yes, I have.
I want you to do me one little favor. And I'm not going to make you play it because I'm sure everybody wants you to play it because it's like their favorite song.
Yeah.
But I want you to play what you want to play. If you pick up the guitar, give me a
Well,
little
the problem with me playing what I want to play is at my age, I forget all my lyrics. So
Hey, I'm with you, brother.
So I might have to play the one that everybody wants to hear, because that one I know the lyrics to.
We'll play it because that's one of my favorite songs. Let me tell you something too. I turned my son on. My son goes, Dad, we share this music app, YouTube Music, and we create playlists. And he goes, I want you to create me a playlist of all your favorite songs. So yours is on there. He listens to it every morning.
No kidding.
Yeah, he's 33. Yeah.
Well, see, I have grown. My daughter's 46. My son, who passed away last year, would have been 42. But we have Thomas, who is 17. I call him Life in Rewind, because it's been a whole different. People say, guys, how do you do that at your age? And I said, man, greatest blessing in the world. It just gives me a whole new lease on life, and I get to do this again. And it was cool. But one time he was listening to Lori Ann on the radio when I was taking him to school, and this was high school. He's like a freshman or something, And I forget which line it was in the song, but he repeated it and looked at me and goes, "That's a good line." I'm like, yes. He gets it. Yeah, I wrote this when I guess I was about 22 when I wrote this.
And I need to thank Dr. Bagway for letting us use his guitar. So I want to make sure, and he's going to be completely thrilled when he finds out Pat Liston is playing.
And I have to remember to turn the E that I got detuned to a D back up to an E, because he's going to
like
wonder.
The Wizard from Uriah Heep, isn't it? Kind of a little bit.
Yeah.
Wasn't that detuned? Yeah.
Anyway, the only story I got on this song is I was with Oak Records. And they said, Pat, Chuck Tharp, who was in charge of the A&R, he said, need 3 songs next week. And I'm thinking, well, I got 5 or 6 songwriters. That should be easy. He goes, no, 3 songs from you. I said, and I think I even did a hair flick, like, oh, dude, that's not how I work. I said, I work when I'm inspired. Well, they were paying me every week just to be a staff writer. And Chuck, who had hair as long as yours, goes like this. He goes, well, maybe I won't be inspired to pay you. And I'm like,
that's awesome.
Wow, that's brutal. I said 3 songs, only wrote 2, couldn't squeeze the 3rd one out, but I was working every night with a band. So I did one song, it was called Kathy. It was a neat little song. And he said, the next one better be better than that one if you've only got 2. And I told him this is all I got, and this is what I played for him. Standing on a bus line, waiting for the number 39 to take me home for the last time. Hoping for the morning rain to fall upon my face, so that it will erase the teardrops in my eyes. 'Cause there's a blue mist in the air, and there's a feeling in my heart that I can't share. And there's a teardrop running down my cheek, and I can't even speak when I think of you. Now we were brought together because of stormy weather, 'cause when the weather got better and the sun came, you were gone. Now you could never make it because you tried to fake it. Then let a stranger come and take it all away. Now I can't live without you, though I often think about you and wonder what had happened had you tried. And you can't live without me, I know this to be true, so I'm giving this song to you to hurt your pride. 'Cause there's a blue mist in the air, and there's a feeling in my heart that I can't share. And there's a teardrop running down my cheek, running down my cheek, baby. 'cause there's a blue mist in the air. It's in the air, so it's everywhere. And there's a teardrop running down my cheek, and it's breaking my heart in two. I'm not used to singing this early.
Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Pat Liston, thank you so much,
Oh,
brother. I
thank you.
appreciate it,
Thank you,
man.
man.